Rachel Reeves was warned she faces a brutal choice between tearing up her spending plans and hiking taxes again today, as she scrambles to calm markets. Sterling tumbled to its lowest level against the US dollar for over a year this morning as investors continued to push up risk premium on UK gilts. The way the state finances its activities. Although the volatile mood seemed to be abating this afternoon, economists believe that with growth stalling and sticky inflation, Ms. Reeves will struggle to balance the books. Yields on government bonds have been rising around the world amid fears over economic prospects and Donald Trump potentially imposing tariffs. However, the impact has been particularly acute in the UK after the October budget, pumped up borrowing to invest in infrastructure, and mounted a huge tax rate on business to fund spending and public sector pay deals. Some analysts argue that the problems are more serious than after Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget in 2022, with comparisons even made to the 1976 IMF bailout. The unusual combination of the currency weakening and gilt yields increasing is seen as particularly worrying, with a Bloomberg index pointing to low liquidity in the bond market. The Treasury has insisted Ms. Reeves views her fiscal rules, including balancing day-to-day spending by 2029, as non-negotiable. She has batted away calls from the Tories and Lib Dems to cancel a trip to China this weekend to manage the situation. But the Chancellor refused to come to the Commons to answer an urgent question on the borrowing costs this morning, instead sending her deputy Darren Jones. MPs shouted, "Where is she?" as Mr. Jones argued that the markets were functioning in an orderly way. Mr. Jones said, "Financial market movements, including changes in government bond or gilt yields, which represent the government's borrowing costs, are determined by a wide range of international and domestic factors. It is normal for the price and yields of gilts to vary when there are wider movements in global financial markets, including in response to economic data." In recent months, movement in financial markets has been largely driven by data and global geopolitical events, which is to be expected as markets adjust to new information, Jones added. The Chancellor has commissioned the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, for an updated economic and fiscal forecast for March 26th, which will incorporate the latest data. Only the OBR's forecast can accurately predict the effect on the public finances of any changes in financial markets or the economy, and I will not preempt their forecast. There should be no doubt of the government's commitment to economic stability and sound public finances. This is why meeting the fiscal rules is non-negotiable. As MPs accused Ms. Reeves of having fled to China, Mr. Jones replied, "The Chancellor is going on her trip to China. It has been well documented for many weeks. An important visit in terms of trade and investment in the economy here in the UK. And might I just say there was no emergency statement or emergency intervention. These are make-believe words being propagated by members on the benches opposite." The Treasury responded to requests from journalists about headroom, as we might do in the normal way. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride said outside of the chamber, "Today, Labour has been forced to make a panicked attempt to reassure the markets on the economic mess of their own making." But Rachel Reeves is missing in action, instead wheeling out her deputy to defend her loss of control of the public finances. The Chancellor should now cancel her travel and focus on this country instead. The pound dropped nearly 1% to just under 1.23 US dollars, its lowest level since November 2023. Yields on government bonds, which reflect the cost of government borrowing, continue to rise, up 8 basis points to 4.89 for 10-year gilts. That is the highest since 2008. So the cost of longer-term borrowing also continued to rise, with the yield of 30-year gilts at their highest level since 1998. So now they were up around 3 basis points to a peak of 5.39%. The rise in the cost of servicing government debt is thought to have wiped out Labor's expected financial headroom. The gilt rally has been sparked by investor worries over rising government borrowing and the mounting threat of so-called stagflation, where the economy sees rising inflation combined with stalling growth. And interest rates have also been moving firmly higher after signs of strength in the economy cast doubts over expectations for further cuts to interest rates. Tory former Chancellor George Osborne said Labour needed to recognise that more money would now go on servicing the UK's debt pile. Rachel Reeves has got to produce some public expenditure plans in the coming months, he told the Political Currency podcast. And she says no return to austerity, but the money that she thought she had is now having to be paid to the global investors who are buying British government debt. Another ex-chancellor, Lord Hammond, said he thought Ms. Reeves should still go to China. But he added, I think we now need a message from the Chancellor that she understands the concerns of business and that she is going to put business investment and economic growth at the very front of her agenda. The IFS think tank said the rise could add around P8 billion to spending if sustained. If recent rises in interest rates were to persist, they could easily erode most of razor-thin margin against the main fiscal rule, researcher Isabel Stockton said. But the issue here is not so much that the past month has been especially eventful, but more that the margin was so small to begin with. If continuing to meet the fiscal target requires new tax rises or cuts to the already tight-looking spending envelope for the subsequent spending review, then the Chancellor and we should not be surprised with the announcement. Kathleen Brooks, research director at XTB, said while still under pressure, the pace of the relentless bond sell-off. But she stressed the pound's reaction shows ongoing concerns in the market. The UK's fiscal position continues to look perilous, she said. The Chancellor is expected to make a speech in the coming days where she may focus on public sector spending cuts rather than further tax increases to meet her fiscal rules. However, the rhetoric from the Labour government is one reason we are in this mess in the first place, and there are no guarantees that Reeves will be able to calm the market. The rise in government borrowing costs poses a challenge for Ms. Reeves, putting pressure on the Treasury's ability to increase public spending amid the prospect of higher interest costs. After the autumn budget, Ms. Reeves was left with only PS 9.9 billion of headroom to meet her revised fiscal rules. This came despite a PS 40 billion package of tax increases to fuel higher spending. Higher debt interest costs may mean the Chancellor would need to trim spending plans or bring in more revenue than expected to meet the fiscal rules. The Chancellor committed last year to having only one fiscal tax-changing event a year, which is expected in the autumn, leaving many to expect that she will opt to rein in spending plans in her March fiscal statement. Economists said a spike in rates could leave the Chancellor facing a P10 billion a year increase in debt interest payments, putting her on course to break her own fiscal rules. Treasury sources last night acknowledged Ms. Reeves could be forced to act as soon as March if skeptical financial markets continue to raise the cost of borrowing. Shadow Business Secretary Andrew Griffith said, tragically, the gilt markets can see that the government's growth plan is dead on arrival. It takes a certain level of incompetence to fiddle your fiscal rules and then still risk missing
of our
them.
ambitious agenda. Those updates will cover the planning system, business regulations, childcare, immigration, agricultural productivity, and digital infrastructure. But, Mr. Speaker, we start this work today. An essential foundation of growth is infrastructure. The roads, railways, and networks that carry people, goods, and information all over our country. Today, our planning system for major infrastructure is too slow and fragmented. The time it takes to get consent for nationally significant projects is getting slower, not quicker, while, Mr. Speaker, our international competitors forge ahead. We have to end this. we can announce that in the coming months we will bring forward a new bill to unpick the complex patchwork of planning restrictions and EU-derived laws that constrain our growth. We will streamline a whole host of assessments, of appraisals, of consultations, endless duplications and regulations. We will also review the government's business case process to speed up decision-making. And today, we are publishing a list of infrastructure projects that will be prioritised for acceleration in sectors like transport, energy and telecoms. And to increase housing supply and enable forthcoming planning reforms, we will also increase the disposal of surplus government land to build new homes. Mr. Speaker, we are getting out of the way to get Britain building. One of the proudest achievements of our Conservative government is that unemployment is at the lowest level for nearly 50 years. But with more vacancies than unemployed people to fill them, we need to encourage people to join the labour market. We will make work pay by reducing people's benefits if they don't fulfil their job search commitments. We will provide extra support for unemployed over 50s and will ask around 120,000 more people on universal credit to take active steps to seek more and better paid work or face having their benefits reduced. Mr. Speaker, at such a critical time for our economy, it is simply unacceptable that strike action is disrupting so many lives. Other European countries have minimum service levels to stop militant trade unions closing down transport networks during strikes. So we will do the same, and we will go further. We will legislate to require unions to put pay offers to a member vote to ensure that strikes can only be called once negotiations have genuinely broken down. And of course, Mr. Speaker, to drive growth, we need new sources of capital investment. To this end, I can announce that we will accelerate reforms to the pension charge cap so that it will no longer apply to well-designed performance fees. This will unlock pension fund investments into UK assets and innovative high-growth businesses. It will benefit, Mr. Speaker, savers and increase growth. And we will provide up to £500 million to support new innovative funds and attract billions of additional pounds into UK science and technology scale-ups. Now, Mr. Speaker, this brings me to the cap on bankers' bonuses. A strong UK economy has always depended on a strong financial services sector. We need global banks to create jobs here, invest here, and pay taxes here in London, not in Paris, not in Frankfurt, and not in New York. All the bonus cap did was to push up the basic salaries of bankers or drive activity outside Europe. It never capped total remuneration. So let's not sit here and pretend otherwise. It didn't cap total remuneration. So as a consequence of this, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get rid of it. And to reaffirm, we're going to get rid of it. And to reaffirm the UK's status as the world's financial services centre, I will set out an ambitious package of regulatory reforms later in the autumn. But, Mr. Speaker, to support growth right across the country, we need to go further with targeted action in local areas. So today, I can announce the creation of new investment zones. We will liberalise planning rules in specified agreed sites, releasing land and accelerating development. And, Mr. Speaker, we will cut taxes. For businesses in designated tax sites for 10 years, there will be accelerated tax reliefs for structures and buildings and 100% tax relief on qualifying investments in plants and machinery. On purchases of land and buildings for commercial or new residential development, there will be no stamp duty to pay whatsoever. On newly occupied business premises, there will be no business rates to pay whatsoever. And if a business hires a new employee in the tax site, then on the first £50,000 they earn, the employer will pay no national insurance whatsoever. That is an unprecedented set of tax incentives for business, Mr. Speaker, to invest, to build, and to create jobs right across the country. I can confirm to the House that we're in early discussions with nearly 40 places like Tees Valley, the West Midlands, Norfolk and the West of England to establish investment zones. And we'll work with the developed administrations and local partners to make sure that Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will also benefit if they are willing to do so. If we really want to level up, Mr. Speaker, we have to unleash the power of the private sector. And now, Mr. Speaker, we come to tax, central to solving the riddle of growth. The tax system is not simply about raising revenue for public services, vitally important though that is. Tax determines the incentives across our whole economy. And we believe that high taxes reduce incentives to work, they deter investment, and they hinder enterprise. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said, we will review the tax system to make it simpler, more dynamic and fairer for families, and we're taking that first step today. Mr. Speaker, the interests of businesses are not separate from the interests of individuals and families. In fact, it is businesses that employ most people in this country. It is businesses that invest in the products and services we rely on. Every additional tax on business is ultimately passed through to families through higher prices, lower pay or lower returns on savings. So I can therefore confirm that next year's planned increase in corporation tax will be cancelled. The corporation tax rate will not rise to 25%. It will remain at 19%, and we will have the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G20. This will plough almost £19 billion a year back into the economy. That's £19 billion for businesses to reinvest, create jobs, raise wages, or pay the dividends that support our pensions. I've already taken steps elsewhere in this statement to support financial services, so the bank surcharge will remain at 8%. But, Mr. Speaker, we will do more to encourage private investment. The annual investment allowance, which gives 100% tax relief on investments in plant and machinery, will not fall to £200,000 as planned. It will remain at £1 million, and it will do so permanently. Our duty, Mr. Speaker, is to make the UK one of the most competitive economies in the world. And we are delivering. We will deliver on this. Mr. Speaker, we want this country to be an entrepreneurial, share-owning democracy. The Enterprise Investment Scheme, the Venture Capital Trust, we will extend beyond 2025. The Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, company share option plans, we will increase the limits to make them more generous. Crucial steps on the road to making this a nation of entrepreneurs. For the tax system to favour growth, Mr. Speaker, it needs to be much simpler. I'm hugely grateful to the Office of Tax Simplification for everything they have achieved since 2010. But instead of a single arm's-length body which is separate from the Treasury and HMRC, we need to embed tax simplification into the heart of government. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I have decided to wind down the Office of Tax Simplification and mandated every one of my tax officials to focus on simplifying our tax code. To achieve a simpler system, I will start by removing unnecessary costs for business. Firstly, we will automatically sunset EU regulations by December 2023, requiring departments to review, replace or repeal retained EU law. This will reduce burdens on business, improve growth and restore the primacy of UK legislation. Mr. Speaker, we can also simplify the IR35 rules, and we will. In practice, reforms to off-payroll working have added unnecessary complexity and cost for many businesses. So, as promised by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, we will repeal the 2017 and 2021 reforms. Of course, we will continue to keep compliance closely under review. Mr. Speaker, Britain welcomes millions of tourists every year, and I want our high streets and airports, our ports and our shopping centres to feel the economic benefit. So we have decided to introduce VAT-free shopping for overseas visitors. We will replace the old paper-based system with a modern digital one, and this will be in place as soon as possible. This is a priority for our great British retailers, so it is our priority too. Our drive to modernise also extends to alcohol duties. I have listened to industry concerns about the ongoing reforms. I will therefore introduce an 18-month transitional measure for wine duty. I will also extend draft relief to cover smaller kegs of 20 litres and above to help smaller breweries. And at this difficult time, we are not going to let alcohol duty rates rise in line with RPI. So I can announce that the planned increases in the duty rates for beer, for cider, for wine and for spirits will all be cancelled. Now, Mr. Speaker, we come to the question of personal taxation. It is an important principle that people should keep more of the money they earn. And it is good policy, Mr. Speaker, to boost the incentives for work and enterprise. Yesterday, we introduced a bill that means the health and social care levy will not begin next year. It will be cancelled. The increase in employer national insurance contributions and dividends tax will be cancelled. And the interim increase in the national insurance rate brought in for this tax year will also be cancelled. And this cut will take effect from the earliest possible moment, November the 6th. Reversing the levy delivers a tax cut for 28 million people, Mr. Speaker, worth on average £330 every year. A tax cut for nearly 1 million businesses, and I can confirm the additional funding for the NHS and social care services will be maintained at the same level. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I have another measure. Today's statement is about growth. Home ownership is the most common route for people to own an asset, giving them a stake in the success of our economy and society. So to support growth, increase confidence and help families aspiring to own their own home, I can announce that we are cutting stamp duty. In the current system, there is no stamp duty to pay on the first £125,000 of a property's value. We are doubling that to £250,000. First-time buyers currently pay no stamp duty on the first £300,000. We're increasing that threshold as well to £425,000. And we're going to increase the value of the property on which first-time buyers can claim relief from £500,000 to £625,000. The steps we've taken today mean that 200,000 more people will be taken out of paying stamp duty altogether. This is a permanent cut, Mr. Speaker, to stamp duty effective from today. I have another measure, Mr. Speaker. High tax rates damage Britain's competitiveness. They reduce the incentive to work, to invest and to start a business. And the higher the tax, the more ways people seek to avoid them, or work elsewhere, or simply work less, rather than putting their time and effort to more creative and productive ends. Take the additional rate of income tax. At 45%, it is currently higher than the headline top rate in G7 countries like the US and Italy. And it is even higher than social democracies like Norway. But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether. From April the 23rd, we will have a single higher rate of income tax of 40%. This will simplify the tax system and make Britain more competitive. It will reward enterprise and work. It will incentivise growth. It will benefit the whole economy and the whole country. And Mr. Speaker, after all, this only returns us This only returns us to the top rate we had for 20 years, including the entire time the opposition was last in power. Bar 1 month. Bar 1 month. And that's not all. I can announce today that we will cut the basic rate of income tax to 19 pence in April 2023, 1 year early. That means a tax cut for over 31 million people in just a few months' time. This means that we will have one of the most competitive and pro-growth income tax systems in the world. Mr. Speaker, for too long in this country, we've indulged in a fight over redistribution. Now we need to focus on growth, not just how we tax and spend. We won't apologise for managing the economy in a way that increases prosperity and living standards. Our entire focus is on making Britain more globally competitive, not losing out to our competitors abroad. The Prime Minister promised that we would be a tax-cutting government. Today, we have cut stamp duty, we have allowed businesses to keep more of their own money to invest, to innovate and to grow. We have cut income tax and national insurance for millions of workers. We are securing our place in a fiercely competitive global economy with lower rates of corporation tax and lower rates of personal tax. We promised to prioritise growth, Mr. Speaker. We promised a new approach for a new era. We promised to release the enormous potential of this country. Our growth plan has delivered all those promises and more, Mr. Speaker, and I commend it to the House.